right, welcome to another episode of Mental Health Mondays. I'm super excited because my guest at this time is the creator of 5149 on the YouTubes. And also, he was the number one draft pick for Breaking Points when they started expanding their team, expanding their bench. And I'm super excited because one of my favorite people on the planet and probably one of the most trusted sources of information and news, at least in my opinion. I'm talking about my guest at this time, James Lee. James, welcome to Mental Health Mondays.
Thank you. What an intro right there. I don't know if I've had one like that, but yes, appreciate you having me on.
Well, I couldn't get the rights to the Chicago Bulls intro. I was going to do, and now from Breaking Points and from YouTube, 5149, James Air Lee.
If only I had the hops.
Hey, you know what? You have your hops in a different way. You have your hops in looking at the real picture and providing much more genuine and trusted information, which I think is desperately needed at this time. Why? Just to kind of start off, where we're at now in society, do you feel like there's a craving for a more honest and news and why do you think that, or do you think that independent news sources are becoming more popular than mainstream?
I think probably throughout history there's been this hunger for the truth, except in the past it's been much more controlled. Like you just didn't have, you probably talks among friends, like you're in your little friend circle, you're like, that doesn't sound right. And that's probably the extent of that reach of that conversation. Whereas today you have these distribution platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, X, and you're able to get the message out. And I think that there are some downsides to this type of megaphone where people could say whatever they want, but I think there's also a lot of upsides that, especially now, I don't know how many people are following what's going on in whether it be like Israel, Palestine, or Ukraine. Before it used to be, hey, this is what the news said, so that we take that. And then now it's like, well, they said that, but here's some other evidence. Go take a look at this. And that is generating just as much, if not more reach than the traditional platform. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's tremendous because and stuff still going on with Maui, with Lahaina, and a lot of it seems like it's kind of a balance. It's weird because it feels like to me, and I don't know if you see it this way, that on one hand it feels like that it's a lot harder to cover up things, or a lot harder to not share information, but it's almost like on the other side there's so much out there, and there seems to be such an effort to misguide. Why do you feel is it hard for everyday people to be critical thinkers? Is that kind of part of the problem?
Well, I don't want to pin it on individuals having a hard time, like in terms of intellect, not having the ability to critically think. I think most people, if not everybody, has the ability to think critically. It's just, I think the environment and how society is set up and the rules in place makes it very difficult to critically think, because it's not just about the desire to critically think. You have to have the space, the time, the resources to sit down and okay, I'm going to take some time to think about this issue, because most people are working the majority of their waking hour. So they don't have the time to do this. And I think that's, from my conspiratorial mind, is okay, I think this specific, the way, let's say the 40-hour work week, all these things are designed to not allow people to critically think, because it's really quite detrimental to how things are set up. If you can start questioning things like, why do we have your personal tax rates compared to corporate tax rates? Why are those things different? And why do they have lower tax rates compared to individuals? And all these things that are we take for, as is, when you start questioning them, then things start to really unravel for people that currently have a lot of power. So I don't think they necessarily want that.
Yeah, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Enjoy. And I used to coin a term a long time ago called drive-through politics. And it's interesting how and because I've also been you've been doing a lot of videos on obesity and the big sugar, if you will, and it's interesting the parallels between why there's such a physical obesity nutrition problem and kind of that drive through politics thing where people are so overworked, it seems, that instead of coming home and cooking a nice healthy meal, just swing by Burger King or McDonald's or just get the microwave processed meal and get the nuggets for the kids. And do you see a parallel between that and also kind of where we get our politics? We want to, when we come home, we necessarily want to be challenged because we've been challenged all day, probably at our job. Last thing we want to do, we just want to comfort. Well, maybe sometimes there's comfort in our own echo chamber or silo.
Absolutely. There's comfort in getting what you want. It's like the parallel to food, I think, is a good one because we all know that this information we're being fed probably is not the best information, but it tastes or sounds really good. Yeah. And we're incentivized to keep going down that path because it feels good versus challenging things and making a person feel really uncomfortable when probably, I imagine, they're uncomfortable most of the day because they're doing things that they don't necessarily want to be doing with that time if they had the choice to. So I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah. Now serving politics with sweet and sour sauce or barbecue, and some side order of fries.
Yeah. But I think now though, I think that is changing. We can see it happening in real time. Mm-hmm. I think mainstream media still has a lot of power, probably more power than independent media if you look at their impact on elections and things that really matter. But I do see this shifting and it will happen over time. There's a reason why things, the establishment is starting to find ways to penetrate independent media spaces like TikTok. When you see accounts that I've been looking into on the side, like things like Gen Z for Change, it's like an account, or you have other people on TikTok that behind the scenes are actually paid by, let's say, the Democratic National Convention, the DNC, the White House. There's a lot of these inner workings that they are preparing for in terms of the next generation to make sure they still have this type of influence over people and over the information that's being distributed.
It's like I think there's these two guys that are like the Biden boys or something, and it's like they're not directly paid by Biden, but it's like there's
a line you can trace.
Yeah, you can trace you follow the money. You're like, oh, wait a minute. And I was recently watching one of your videos where you're talking about like Big Sugar and how they had all these TikTok ladies are all talking about give your kids Halloween candy. Oh, it's going to be the. And then you go and you look and it's like, you look down at the bottom, sponsored by Big Sugar, sponsored by, there was one on sugary drinks. And the study that they were trying to, or they were trying to bust out, you look down at the bottom of the website, it says sponsored by the Beverage Association. You're kind of like, wait a second. I see what's going on here. Do you think it's necessary then for us to be a little more, I mean, we probably should always be a little more forgiving of people, but this absolutist when it comes to disagreeing, I feel like we're missing out on learning from each other. My dad is, he watches Fox News. He's got his own echo chamber, and can you believe Pelosi about that kind of stuff, and to the point where sometimes I have to tell him to cool it on Facebook because like my aunt will post a picture of her granddaughter and say, "Oh, she's so cute. Look at her Halloween costume," and Dad will reply, "Well, don't let Biden see her. He'll come over and take her health care." And I'm like, "Dad, this is not go back to yourself." But I feel though like there is this fear, like, and I like to call it skepticism rather than conspiracy, but it's sometimes I feel like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat but then all of a sudden there's evidence that makes me think maybe this is like these conspiracies are real. Do you think though that there's a kind of this lack of trust in mainstream media is leading to a lot more conspiracy skepticism, or is it getting out of control? And do we need to kind of temper that with some understanding?
Well, I think, first off, I love watching just every single, like I'll watch Fox, I'll watch CNN, I'll watch Independent, just because I want to know what people are thinking. I want to know because that's how I form my ideas, is that I try to listen to everybody, because I think everybody somewhat has some good ideas, right? I think Fox's criticism of, say, Pelosi is probably fair in some aspects. And I want to know,
Mm-hmm.
which ones are the fair ones, which ones are not the fair ones, and be able to distinguish them. But in terms of the second part of the question of, is there too much conspiracy going on and this and that? I think the conspiracies have always existed through
Mm-hmm.
throughout history. There's been theories of trying to explain why things are the way they are. That is, I guess, not accepted by the quote unquote established mainstream. And I think if we desire a world where that isn't as prominent as it is right now, it seems like everything there is a conspiracy. It's up to the establishment. It's up to the institution itself to reform and give the information that people want, right? If for example, if let's say take one of the most polarizing issues, COVID, right? If the CDC was, or Pfizer, these vaccine makers, if they released all the information, not just summaries of the information, let's say, hey, just give us all the data. That way there's no room for conspiracy, because then we could see everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
when they start interpreting things and say, well, there is some gray area here. Let's, talk about that. Or if you go in terms of finance, if you talk about the consumer, what is it? The consumer price index, right? There's a lot of conspiracies around there because we don't have the underlying data of what they're doing. They release, hey, here are the categories of products we're considering for this year, but they change it all the time. We don't really know what's going on. And so that leaves room for someone like myself or other people to start questioning, or using the word skepticism that you did, to say, well, I can see, some trends here. It's like, is inflation really where they say it is? Is there some kind of ulterior motive that they have in mind? If they want to adjust interest rates, and then the inflation rate will be where they kind of want it to be to justify those actions. I don't know. So I think it's not up to, I think you can never expect and go to the individual and say, well, you are a bad person because you keep entertaining these conspiracies. I think it's more on the institution to reform itself. Like, we're not responsible for reforming the institution.
Yeah, the burden of proof is actually on the institutions, and I think that used to be kind of where media, I think, or journalism should be. Where it's like, hey, wait a minute, let's take a look at this, because it's so easy for CNN or Fox to say, here's the headline, and mainstream media has kind of put, like, the Weekly World News, Bat Boy, Bat Child, and all that kind of, and Bigfoot. They put them out of business because they're now the sensational headline. It's like, I don't care about Bat Boy. I want to find out if is Biden secretly a lizard? Wait, or something like that. But yeah, you're right, and I think it's interesting that, it's that's why I have a hard time when somebody like my dad is out there, and then I've got my super liberal aunt, same thing. She's got her conspiracies, and it's like, and I have to kind of, I have to temper it with compassion, because there's usually a nugget of truth in what they're saying. They may not quite understand it, but I don't blame them for feeling that way, because these institutions haven't done anything to make us feel any better. They're just they want us to blame the person without looking at the stuff. And it's looking at the data, looking at the actual story, and it kind of leads to cancel culture. And do you think that cancel culture itself is kind of being weaponized a little bit?
I think absolutely. I think cancel culture is a potential cancer in society that's always existed, and it because it's so one-sided. Because you don't have, most people don't have the power. You can't yourself cancel. You can only be canceled. And it's up to whatever the issue is at the time to be on the right side of that issue to keep your job, because ultimately the power that they have is like, you need to survive. So
yeah,
there's not much you can do if that is always hanging over your head, right? That's one of the things that I always critique, is that if we want more freedom, if freedom is the goal in society, I think all kinds of different people with all different kinds of beliefs will agree that we want more freedom as individuals. But the way to achieve more freedom is like through things like healthcare, to have, you to be not worried about whether or not you're going to be able to go to the doctor and these kinds of things, because now with the employment tied to the job per se, it's like, well, if I lose my job, I lose my livelihood.
Yeah.
And that is bad for freedom, because then you can't go out there and say what you want to say. And part of my mission always is like, I want to make myself, almost uncancelable in a way. It's like, hey, I'm out here, I'm trying to just say the things that I think should be said. And hopefully something positive will come from that.
Yeah, there's definitely a prisoner's dilemma in employment. I saw it as a teacher whenever we if you talk to any teacher and you get a real honest response, and not the pretend response of teaching is great, this is for the kiddos. When you get a real honest teacher's response, we're very frustrated and fed up with how top heavy the education system is and how little control teachers have in education. I mean, we've got 20 to 25 to 30 students in a room. We've got, there's a huge influx in IEPs, and I'm not saying IEPs are a problem, but it's how they're being handled, how like student discipline. I mean, we had in Newport News, we had a 6-year-old shoot his first grade teacher, and that situation could have been avoided because it wasn't like a surprise. They had gone to the administration several times about this kid. He had a behavior plan that wasn't followed, and there were so many problems with it. And then when the teacher sued the school system said, no, it's part of workman's comp. That if you're shot as a teacher on the job, then that's workman's comp because teaching is dangerous. And that's yeah, look up the Newport News teacher. That just blows my mind. But what happens a lot of times, and I see this in a lot of jobs, and I don't know if you've seen this, where it does become that prisoner's dilemma, is employees are afraid to speak up because are they going to be the one that gets chopped? And then there goes your healthcare. There goes your stability. And so many of us are paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth, that we can't afford that gap. Do you kind of see it that way?
100%. Most people, they do the calculation in their mind, and then say it's not worth it. It's just getting your voice heard in that situation is not worth all the downstream things of losing your health care, losing your livelihood. Is just, you can't do it. And that's kind of what happened. Like if you think back on, I remember it was with the Harvey Weinstein thing, right? Mm-hmm. So that was released. It was a New York Times, and then it was Ronan Farrow from I think the New Yorker or some magazine.
New Yorker.
Don't quote me on that. But it takes someone like him, who I believe, when I did more research, like had an incredibly privileged background, and that he could lose his job and be fine. Because a lot of people, if you remember, they couldn't cover it because they're like, we have this, I think ABC had this thing where they had all the information and they shut it down because they were like, well, we need the access. And then the anchor was very frustrated because she didn't want to lose her job. And so she's like, okay, well, I guess I got to drop it. So ultimately this system is kind of self-insulating in a way where it really deters people from speaking out and speaking whatever truth there might be. I think truth is hard to say because everybody has their own opinions on whatever this matter is, but
my truth.
Yeah. But I think ultimately it's not good. Well, it just maintains the status quo. That's kind of how the system is designed.
Yeah. Who was the journal? There was a journalist. God, I can't remember her name, but she like hot mic'd talking about the Epstein thing, and then all of a sudden that was a huge controversy, or it was something that, this was a while back. But yeah, if you can't afford to be uncancelable or like independently sustainable, then you can't. You can't say what truths need to be said. So that's where sources like you and Breaking Points, and there's a lot of independent news sources out there, and everybody's got their bias. I don't always agree with Crystal and Sagar. I don't always agree with like Kim Iverson, and there's even like Jimmy Dore does a lot of stuff. He can get a little spicy sometimes, but yeah, but it's kind of like you said, if you're looking at everything, you can kind of, there's a pattern. You can kind of get the story from different angles and kind of make up your own mind. And it's not always easy to do that. And a lot of people don't like, again, going back to what we were saying, and they, they're exhausted. The last thing they want to do is, is try to be a critical thing, or try to be skeptical and really do some research. On the flip side, though, do you feel like there is a maliciousness, or is it kind of like Hanlon's razor, where it's, don't mistake malevolence when stupidity can explain it, or like incompetence can explain it? Is it a balance of both?
I think it depends on the situation. I think there's a bit of both in everything, right? It could be that the people in charge are just extremely incompetent. That's definitely a part of it. And another part of it is just like their incentive structure. I think, coming from the corporate world, right? I can't put out there and say, oh, all the CEOs are purposely trying to make their workers, super poor and near poverty and these kinds of things. I don't think that's necessarily their intent. But I think when decisions are made, I can tell you firsthand, they're made not with people in mind. They're made based on spreadsheets. I've done it in my professional life, literally looking at, I have a spreadsheet of everybody's name right here, and I got their salary right here, and I got the org structure right here. And they just go, all right, who do we cut? And then you don't know who these people are.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, oh, well, let's just move this guy over here. And then it's done. And then you have no idea like what their life is like. There's no consideration there because that's not part of the equation.
Yeah.
I think those, you can call, is that malicious? Is that just part of the job? I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is like, well, it's my job to cut X dollars right now. They're telling me I got to do this, and this is the way we're doing it. And you can't say those people are evil. They're just in the system of requiring them to do those things.
Do you think there's a tendency that it allows for corruption, though, when you have an incentive program that, like, for example, my dad retired from the Navy, and he worked for, of all places, General Dynamics. That's a whole other story. And he's there's things I think he could tell some stories, but one of the things that happened was they were all set to get this big bonus, all the employees, and somehow the funds for their bonus got diverted to another department that was in the red, and that made everybody in the black. And then that person that was in charge got a bonus. So it took away everybody's bonus and gave the guy in charge a bonus. And it's this. I mean, we explain it like that, it sounds corrupt. But do you think that a lot of institutions are set up to almost create that greed mentality? Like, because I have administrators in education. They're rated on standardized test scores and reducing overhead. So if they can convince the IT guy to cover a classroom, they don't have to hire a sub when a teacher's out, and that makes them look good. But it also is not the best ideal for a student. Do you think that is what's kind of creating a lot of these situations?
I think so. I think if you look at the economic system that we like capitalism, right? So I'm not necessarily, I don't like to put labels on myself. So I don't ever say like, hey, I'm anti-capitalist or this and that, but I'm just looking at the system itself. If you think about it, it requires, so it's everybody's an individual, including companies or people. It requires you in this particular transaction to get the most that you can possibly get out of the other person that you're doing the transaction with, and give them the least. And this happens in every single transaction.
Yeah.
So you're trying to basically gouge as much as possible, get as much as possible. So then over a number of these transactions, over a period of days, weeks, months, years, decades, this is how we get from, let's say in 1950, having the CEO and worker compensation ratio be, somewhat in line. It was like 1 to 26 or whatever the number is, to now 1 to 350s, because you're always trying to get the most of the other person. And then over a period of time, that's what happens. It's like this system demands that. So that's you can't have any other outcome but what we're seeing right now. Should be like almost not a surprise, and it's expected. If it didn't happen, then something would be amiss, almost, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. It's kind of, I like the quote that I can't remember who said it, but that capitalism is the worst system except for all the others. It's like, or it's something along those lines. But it's interesting that it's set up that way. And I remember, I don't remember which video it was, but you talked about when you were in business training, in business school, that a lot of the stuff you were learning, it wasn't just like, hey, debits and credits, but a lot of it was maybe, a little bit of union busting, a little bit of kind of, how to almost like almost akin to like the old boiler room, Glengarry Glen Ross kind of mentality, and which, one could argue, Donald Trump is kind of the personification of that time. Even when he was doing The Apprentice, I remember I was in car sales at the time, and we were all, loving you fired and all this kind of stuff. And, we were really into that, always be closing. And do you think that that's like, is it necessarily like wrong to have that mentality, and or is there room for like that honest salesperson? Hey, I need to make a profit, but I'm not going to do it at the expense of my integrity. Is it possible to have that kind of salesperson or in the business world?
I think it's totally possible. I think that's why I always advocate for I advocate for entrepreneurship. I advocate for, quote unquote, capitalistic principles, but it has to be done at a localized level, right? I've talked about this in banking. When you start having like 1-2 banks in the US that are dominating everything, there's no way to, you don't know who you're lending to. Whereas if you think, okay, if you have your credit union in your small town that is actually interfacing with the people of that town and you actually get to know them, that is when you find, I think, the more appropriate balance of the quote unquote honest salesperson or whatnot, because you're considering human values, humanity into your business transaction. And that's, I think, what it takes. And that's why I'm a big proponent of breaking up, big tech and monopolies and these kinds of things. I don't think like mergers and these types of things they don't serve competition. Things usually become more expensive when companies merge. It doesn't make it better for the workers. So everybody loses out except the small group of shareholders that have, won in that case, in that transaction. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's scary when you look at like, CNN brought to you by Pfizer, and it's also under this umbrella corporate. When you really look at how few umbrellas there are underneath all of these companies, and it is a bit scary. But plus, I love what you said about credit unions, because you can almost argue that works with like the police as well, because when you have a credit union that's like a local town credit union, you're going to see these people. Whereas you don't have, like your analogy earlier, when you have that spreadsheet of names, we're going to cut the bottom 20. That's Billy and Sally down the street who are trying to get their son into college. That plays into it. But if you're at megacorp.com, you're just going to cut those 20. You don't have to look at that. And it's kind of like when situations like what's going on when the Gaza Strip, and I really, really loved your video on with BetterHelp, and which, the BetterHelp lawsuit is interesting, and just kind of the stuff going around with BetterHelp.com is, and I have kind of two thoughts on it. One, is it a crime to, like, it's icky to take advantage of a situation like this, but is it necessarily unethical? I mean, when you're trying to maximize your business profits, and that's kind of where, like, I feel icky about it. But then again, if it's raining and I'm in the business of umbrellas,
Absolutely. Well, so the ickiness factor, or whether it's ethical or not, or legal or not, is up to the definition of that particular country, right? Every sovereign nation kind of defines their ethics in different ways. And let's say, so I think as a business, right? As a business, I don't think they're doing anything that's out of the norm necessarily, right? Because they're being like the Uber of mental health, right? They're trying to make everything. Everybody is a gig worker. That's kind of like the Silicon Valley playbook is like, oh, we're going to take this industry that already exists, and then we're just going to strip all of the benefits away, and then everybody's a gig worker, but also theoretically flexible work, or whatever they say to sell that business model. And that's their pitch. So that I think could have some negative effects in some industries, such as mental health, because you can't look at everything like that. Every business, so like in some ways it's fine to apply this type of the principle, but in some it's really, really detrimental. So I think as a country, we have to think about ethics in a way. It's like, what are you trying to create, right? Because all these businesses, if they could pay workers zero, they would. I mean, for a long time in our history, until 1865, it is 100% legal to pay somebody $0 for work. In fact, you can own that person, and that would be the best for shareholder return. If I can make a condition where I don't have to pay these guys to do anything, that's the best. But then we decided as a country that, that's the profit does not outweigh this humanity of people, being a free person trying to live their life the way they want to. So then when I think about these issues, I always say, well, what are you trying to do? Do you care about only the profit, or do you care about like having other things in the society? The other issues are like, oh, well, we can't have like, we can't redo the power lines in California because it costs us too much money. And then you have those fires and all this stuff. It's like, well, do you care about protecting people at all? Is that a consideration? Or so that's when I think about ethics. It's like, well, ultimately, what do you want to get out of it? And that's, I think, a better way to think about it, other than just trying to trying to get people to do the right thing. I'm like, well, it's not about the right thing, because the right thing is different for everybody. It's like, is this the thing that you want?
Yeah, is this the outcome you'll like? Yeah, like, and it really comes to, and it's interesting too, because with technology and with social media, where a lot of cultures are now, I would say clashing, but United States, even parts of the United States have different there's different groups and kind of cultures, but the idea of what's ethical, the idea of what's right or wrong can be subjective, and depending on their background. I went to Virginia Military Institute, and we have an honor code. And if you're caught lying, cheating, or stealing, they drum you out. They wake you. They strip your name from the records like you were never there, and they do this whole ceremony. And there was a student there that in his culture, it's ethical and moral for, if somebody takes something from you, you take something from them. And he didn't understand why he was being kicked out of school, because he didn't understand in his culture. That's how he was raised. It's what he's experienced. And so I think there is that. It really comes down though, like what your definition of a society is and what it should be. I always feel like if you want the protections of the society you're in, you do kind of need to follow their scaffolding. But on the flip side, if the society societies, I feel like, need to protect their members, but in some cases, like you said, like we were talking about, there was a time where you were illegally allowed to pay somebody $0 to do their work, to do the work for you. Yeah, I think it's interesting how that duplicity works. What's with BetterHelp though? Do you think that that's one of those institutions that we probably shouldn't turn into an Uber? Like, I mean, Dr. Zeke, sitting there going, bummer, dude. Sounds like you had a rough day, man. Go get a taco.
Yeah. I think there's got to be more. I I think there's got to be more oversight in those situations. Like, I think businesses always push the boundaries of the law, right? That's their whole goal is to go to the line, almost maybe slightly cross it, just right there at the border, because that's what they're incentivized to do. So then, talking about society, it's the only thing that could protect people from that would be the government. Except the government is oftentimes the same people as the corporation, which is the big problem that we have here. Because what's happening right now is that these companies are coming in, they're basically sucking up all the profit from this industry, like talking to therapists and such. They're just taking it all from them. And then they bear none of the responsibility, because in the end of the day, they just say, well, we're just a platform. We just connect people. We're not a healthcare business. We're not, we're just a platform, or whatever they're calling themselves. So then, it becomes
in my Dr. Evil voice.
Exactly. So I think we have to decide as a society whether or not we want this particular outcome or not, if it's worth it or not. So that's why I never try to appeal to anybody's, good sense or like shame them into being good people, because I think that's like you said, it's different for everybody. Some person, coming from a different upbringing thinks that's good and that's bad. But I just try to be as specific as possible and say, hey, if you choose this path, this is the outcome of it.
Yeah.
Do you like this outcome or do you not like this outcome? And then you can choose.
More from a functionality and a standpoint than emotion, like less pathos and more logos, kind of like, hey, this is what if this is what you're going to do, this is what the likely outcome is, rather than how dare you even consider, what is wrong with you? So, yeah, I mean, I thought the whole Better Help thing is interesting. I encourage everybody to check out your video on that, which reminds me that brings our first sponsor. This segment is sponsored by Better Help. Do you need a psychologist? I'm just kidding. We're not sponsored by Better Help. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I do think that's interesting how like when you're comparing different concepts of ethics and morals kind of converge, and like what's the best way to kind of resolve those differences, and like how do we kind of fix a lot of this stuff that's just driving us nuts?
Well, I think you have to separate these institutions that we have. There's too much like commingling of money, basically. It's like the movie Idiocracy, which I bring up all the time. Is like when the corporation and the government are one and the same.
You mean the documentary? Idiocracy, the documentary movie. Idiocracy.
Yeah, it almost is like they did it so well for the most part. I think almost every detail they got right on. Like, I think that movie came out in like 2004. Yeah. And now we're in 20 years later. It's like, well, that's kind of this. I mean, we are like one step away from literally, yes, banners of, logos in the halls of Congress, basically. So I think you have to differentiate, because there's always going to be competing, because I'm a big fan of like balance. There has to be balance in society. Right now, it's just too unbalanced. Where one group has way too much power, meaning that the group with money has too much power, and theoretically these so-called public servants are too tied to the money making. I think I made this TikTok about Dan Crenshaw when he was asked whether or not Congress people should be able to own stocks.
Yeah,
and his answer was, well, without owning stocks, there's no way for us to improve our financial lot. That was a paraphrase. Yeah. And that's very honest, but it's also the question has to be asked, is that the point of you being in Congress, to improve your financial situation? I don't think that is the point of that job. So if you choose that job, that's not really what it's all about. And so I think that is the number one thing, which is why it's, I think, never talked about. Like, nobody on the debate stage has ever asked this, like in terms of whether you're running for president or any other office position, to talk about, well, are you going to take money? Like, who are you taking money from? Like, that should be like the number one disclosure. Like, hey, name the top 10 donors that you have right now. Go.
Raytheon. Yeah, it was like Robin Williams had that great joke about all Congress, everybody in the government should be like NASCAR, They should
Yeah.
wear the patches of who's paying for them, so we all at least know.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be a fun. That'd actually be a fun. Now I'm thinking like an augmented reality app. If you just hold your phone up and they'll just like, if you scan the congressman, they'll just be, all right, here's all their patches here.
No, just like Roddy Piper, man. You put the glasses on
Yeah.
and you can just see, oh, there you go. I'm out of bubble gum. But yeah, that would be pretty cool. So what's this like? And yeah, some of my rule out there, but my good friends who have, I have discussions with, is the solution instead to get to, term limits and maybe even have, much more people that are there. Like, how do you motivate those in power to give up power? I mean,
well,
without violence.
I was going to say, I did, in a very recent video of mine in the last couple minutes, I introduced this idea of this book that I came across that basically suggested that in terms of solving inequality at any point in history, if there was some kind of realignment of power, it always came about through violence. There was no example of a nonviolent uprising that really had any effect whatsoever.
Wait, are you saying Occupy Wall Street? You saying Occupy Wall Street didn't work?
Yeah. That's so we got to be really careful about what we say right here. This is a purely, like I always say, this is an academic discussion that we're
discussion. We are not promoting any final solution of any kind here. This is not any kind of, we're not promoting anything here. This is academic. Yes.
And this was the book, I believe it was published by Yale University Press, something along one of those institutions. And so I was just absorbing that information and taking it in. But in terms of in a non-violent way, I think what people have to do is kind of give up their tribal instincts to say like, well, this is the party that I've always been with. I'm going to support them no matter what, or be comfortable with supporting a candidate that you think you can't win. Because I think it's really odd to me that like in sports, we love the underdog story. It doesn't matter whether we think they have an opportunity to win. It's like March Madness, right? We are consumed in that because we love to see the little team that has zero chance possible or near zero chance of winning and go, let's see how far they can go. Whereas in politics, it's so different. It's like people don't want to support a losing candidate for some reason. They're like, oh, that guy can't win. Well, it's like, well, it doesn't matter if he can win or can't win at this point. Do you like that guy? Does he stand? Does he represent the values that you want in the government? And that should be, if everybody voted like that, then we would have a total realignment of the people who are actually in office. But I haven't done enough research or enough, public opinion polling and things like that to understand why there's a big gap here between how people view sports and how people, vote.
It does seem like there's a parallel. I mean, people are rabid red or blue, just like they are Jets or Patriots. It's like, or they're, it's kind of like that. My team's got to win, and it's almost like if you say I'm a Democrat, you get this list of things you have to believe, and then you have to almost do that. Anything that's for my side, I'm going to promote, or if it's against my side, I'm just going to downplay. But then the flips, and you kind of see this a lot with, and it's sad. I mean, not to get into the actual nuts and bolts, because that could be an entire separate podcast. But the latest stuff with the Gaza, with the Israel-Palestine, and how a lot of people that were saying one thing about Ukraine and Russia changed their tune when it came to Israel and Palestine. And I don't know the solution. I mean, I don't think either one of us really know, but like what bothers me is when people kind of change their mindset, or they change what they're saying because their side is going to look good if they say it this way. Does that make sense?
I think there's definitely like a uniformity to say, hey, if you're a Democrat or if you're a progressive, you must believe in this value kind of thing. And I think the Israel Gaza thing is is not necessarily complicated in the sense of like what's going on there, but it's complicated because it is introducing a dynamic where the group that is, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but the group that is historically has been very oppressed throughout all of the Western world is now seemingly becoming the oppressor in that particular situation. And I think that is breaking people's brains a lot, because this is a group that is, you can't even deny that, like, they were, kicked around all throughout Europe. The horrible stuff happened. And now it seems to me that they, in order to achieve, when I mean they, I'm talking about the Israeli government specifically, their objectives seems to be wiping out another group of people so they can kind of enjoy whatever they want to do there. So that, I think that's really hard to compute. There's also the money aspect that maybe you're alluding to with the lobbying of AIPAC and groups like that. That's why we're seeing the tune change. Like in Ukraine, we really cared about this, but it seems like totally different in this scenario. So I think there's a couple things at play that's making the response complicated. But in terms of my knowledge on the issue itself, I think when people say it's complicated, is just to say like, let's not talk about this too much.
Yeah, I think that's, and what bothers me again is how rabid people have gone about this, and it happens a lot on social media when whatever it is, like how quickly when COVID started, how quickly so many experts on disease and vaccines were on Twitter, and then or on X, and then with Ukraine, how many people they're suddenly so familiar with the Ukraine and Russia thing. And then now there's so many people that have these opinions on Gaza. And I feel like the shouting method takes away from communication. It instead, if you don't agree with me, then like, look at these dead babies. How dare you not agree? How dare you question anything of the government here or this person over there? And to me, none of these issues are that cut and dry. They're very nuanced, and there's a lot of stuff on all sides that are just bad. But if you try, I don't think anybody wants a solution that's, well, obviously maybe not a peaceful one, but it seems like when you yell, attack the person, you don't want to hear what they have to say, and therefore you lose the nuance, you lose the discussion, you don't listen, and you almost lose that opportunity to either learn or convince the other person to see things your way.
And in terms of all of these issues, I think that we got to make a very important distinction of the people online. Their goal is not necessarily to come to a solution. Their goal is to like elevate their own stature and
I got likes. Look at all I dunked on James Lee today on that.
That's their goal. And then so we have to look at, okay, for the people involved in this conflict, like what are they hoping for? And it's different. That's where it's coming from as far as all of these issues, is that, like, if you take the COVID one, right? It's like, well, it seems to me that this vaccine probably is doing some good stuff. There seems to be a few side effects, and there seems to be something weird going on with how the clinical trials are done and this and that. And then it's like, some people really value, like, hey, I want to be 100% sure before we take this. Other people are like, no, it's for the greater good. Like, this is how it's done. And so then and then people start shaming each other and that kind of thing. I think the hate just leads to more hate. You're just escalating the amount of hate. Whereas, like, I think the approach that I always try to take is like trying to be like outlining, okay, here's like the outcome. And probably this is, the likely outcome if you go down this path. Are you comfortable with this? If they're comfortable with it, I can't even argue with them. It's like, okay, well, then that's kind of the path that we're going down. But I'm trying to get everybody to, like, that's my personal goal, is to get everybody to be like really comfortable with what they feel. And like really own it,
Is that kind of, and maybe you can explain a little bit about your channel 5149. Where is now? I'm gonna guess,
okay,
and then I'm gonna see how close I am.
Okay,
I think 5149. It's percentages of how you approach issues. You are 51% one way, but you're open to the 49% of the other side of an issue. Am I anywhere near
The beauty of this is that you're able to interpret this however you want. But I
Okay.
can tell you the genesis of the story
Yes.
because it is actually kind of a nickname that a good friend of mine gave to me because he's like just observing my behavior in the wild. And you're like, dude, you're saying some stuff like I'm pretty sure like 51% of the people are fine and totally agree with that. And then 49% will find it extremely offensive what you're saying. So that's kind of where it got started. But there's a whole, like, since I've been doing it, it's taken on different meanings for me. Like, for example, you know, what I strive for, let's try to find, if we're living in a democracy, like, let's try to find a 51% solution. Like, that should be what we're looking for, right? It's very, very pragmatic in a way of like, let's try to find something that's going to work for the most number of people. Or there's actually an emotional component to 5149 as far as like a love, like, hey, I'm going to give 51% and then only expect the 49. So I'm always going to give more than the other
1%
person.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different meaning. I think that the original one came from that, and then it's just kind of taken on and some different things. And I think that's the beauty of something symbolic like that. And the funny story is that like I have a tattoo of that on my arm, and then I went to Europe. This is like 5 or 6 years ago. And I met a couple of Italian guys and we kind of hit it off. And they're like, I was telling them about the 5149 idea. This was way before I even started any YouTube channels or anything like that. And they're like, man, we love that idea. And I saw them again the next year and they had the same tattoo on them.
That's rad.
Which is,
hey, there's 5149. Look at us. We got that tattoo. That's so cool, man. Yeah. And if it's like, you can live life 5149, you know? I like that. And that's kind of like, you know, if everybody likes you or everybody hates you, you're probably doing something wrong. But if 51% of people agree with you and 49% hate you, yeah, maybe you're kind of in the right zone. You know, or I don't know if that's necessarily the analogy, but yeah, that 5149 lifestyle, I like that.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm trying to just tell what I think is going on, which is ultimately going to upset people because I don't like being boxed into say like that's why when people try to label my politics, I always reject any label. They're like, oh, you're a leftist or I've been called anything from a leftist all the way to being an alt-right, you know, fascist, you know, pipeline. So I'm like, how can those two?
Yeah, right.
At the same time,
fascist. It's like what?
yeah. So that's what I've so like when something's going on, when the labeling is that wide of a dispersion, that means that these labels don't really mean anything. So then, so my take is like I'm always going to try to figure out what the input and the output of things are, and then hopefully then you can make up your mind to say, okay, is that good? Because I was because this is kind of top of mind. I'm about to do a video on this on TikTok, but talking about like Israel, Palestine. It's like, if you think about it compared to America, like we exterminated a lot of Native Americans here. And you can make the argument that it was good for the United States. We had to do it because if we had those guys out there doing their own tribes, it would cause a lot of societal turmoil. There might be skirmishes and things like that doesn't exist right now because we wiped them out. So you know, 100 years later, 200 years later, we don't have this kind of we don't have that problem at the moment. So from some certain perspective, like that's an outcome that's desirable. Now it killed like millions and millions of people to get this outcome. So I try not to be like, well, you're a horrible person. I was like, well, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know how you view that kind of thing, but that's just where I am in terms of looking at something like that. It's not black and white, like you said. It's from one perspective, this is how they feel. From another, this is how they feel.
Well, it kind of goes also, you know, at what point do we accept slavery in the United States, but also the Emancipation Proclamation, and what, regardless of its, you know, agenda or purpose, we've moved forward. But it's like we also have to accept that we had slavery in the United States, and it's one of those things where I feel like if we dwell too much on one side or the other, we ignore if we're too busy going, well, we're free now. There's freedom now. There's no slaves now. We're not acknowledging the past. But then if we're too wrapped up in look at the evils of the United States, we forget about that. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, it's kind of like if
yeah.
are we going to go Nat Turner on everybody again? I mean, what what are we looking to do?
And that's why I always say, like, when people, I think this is an important message that I try to convey if I'm asked about this, is like, they're like, you critique the United States all the time. You know, you only complain and you bring up all this bad stuff. But where I'm coming from is like, I do this because I like the United States. Like, of all the countries that I've been to, like, the U.S. is like by far like the most open, the most not racist. Like, in my opinion, it's such a difficult environment to create, right? If you have all these different cultures here, it's like we've done a pretty decent job given how difficult the task is. Like, the reason why like Finland is like very, you know, well run is because there's only Finnish people, you know, for those, like,
yeah,
that's it. You don't have all this like clashing cultures and ideas and stuff. And I think so. I think this country has done a pretty decent job of handling all of that, all that diversity, to give it a little bit of credit.
I hope we get to a point where we start advocating culture appreciation instead of instead of labeling it culture appropriation. I would love, of course, you know, my ancestors' culture is haggis and kilts. I don't know necessarily. Yeah, I don't want to encourage people to eat haggis, but you know, but like if there was the case where there was a sushi chef, an Australian immigrant, and she set up a sushi restaurant.
I saw that. Yes, I saw that recently.
And she was they were trying to cancel her because how dare you be a colonizer and try to. And it turns out the guy that was like leading the whole thing was like he had a Puerto Rican Japanese fusion restaurant, and he was kind of doing the same. He was kind of doing the same kind of thing, I almost feel like. And I feel like, you know, even Rachel Dolezal kind of got a bum rap. I mean, I don't know. It's like, if you look at like, she wasn't ethnically there, but like she was working for I almost said NCAA, NAACP. Yeah, she was also NCAA. She was, no, she was trying to do a lot of good. And I think that gets ignored sometimes. And as a teacher, we would have a diversity banquet at the end of the year where we would all bring in different dishes from our different cultures. And some kids, if they didn't know or didn't have any special cultures, they would research a culture. And I had this very, very blonde-haired, blue-eyed little kid. He researched Nigeria and brought in some, was it fufu? Something like that, some kind of cuisine, and maybe I'm mixing my countries, but he brought it in. It was delicious, but it's like I thought it was so cool that here's this kid who's likely from like a Swedish or Finnish descent. He didn't know because the parents didn't really know much about the history, but he's presenting this new culture to us, and he's done the research. I thought that was fantastic. Do you feel? Don't you want more of that kind of stuff in our country?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way. It was a cultural appreciation, right? If I'm, you know, like you're wearing, look like a Hawaiian shirt. I don't know if that's considered appropriation or not appropriate, but I think I like this shirt. I like the style of it. I'm going to wear it, and maybe more people want to wear it. Maybe that brings, you know, people more interest in Hawaii or something else like, that I have is,
well, look at your hat. Are you a park ranger or what's going on? Are you appropriating a park ranger?
Yeah, I like, you know, if I enjoy like Mexican, you know, I want to wear a sombrero, like should be, and no Mexican, you know, I've seen some of those videos, like no Mexican found it like, they're like, is this offensive? Yeah, no, it's not offensive to me. It's like, it's fine. and so I think we need to have more of that. I don't know exactly why we've gotten to this kind of like exclusionary type of identity politics where it's very much the antithesis of what I think Martin Luther King was striving for, where it's like, hey, this is one of my old professors talked about this, is like, hey, we're going to draw as big a circle as possible and include everybody in this versus like, hey, I'm going to do a small circle. Like, hey, if you're not a part of this, then you can't talk about this and you can't be a part of this conversation type of identity that we're kind of the society that we've cultivated for right now.
Yeah, and I think it helps too, getting out there and seeing other countries. I was a military brat, so we got to move a lot. I lived in Japan for 2 years. I mean, I love Japanese culture. I got to see the Power Rangers before they were brought to the United States in the pure Japanese form. Then I lived in Iceland. I got to, experience, that Nordic kind of culture. And it's just really, I feel like we need to, I mean, I don't know if it's about mandatory, but it's a shame we don't encourage our young people, like maybe around that 18, 19 years old, to go and do like a year somewhere in another country. And what are some of the countries you visited, and how have they been different and similar? And what were some of your cool experiences visiting other countries? And what did you take back from those?
Yeah, I mean, I've been all over, Asia as well as Europe. Africa, not so much. I think that part is more foreign to me. But I think it's I've taken like different ways of life. For example, like in Spain, very different in terms of the work culture there. That's something that boom hits you in the face. It's like, hey man, I want to open my restaurant. Like I remember this story. Like we went up to a restaurant. It was like maybe like 40% full. There's tables open everywhere, and they're like, oh no, it's so busy. Like we can't do it.
You're right.
And like maybe come back in an hour or two potentially. And I'm like, that would never happen in America. America's like, I'm going to take your money. Yeah, like sit.
Yeah, we're going to set up extra tables. Come on, yeah.
And there's like for them, and they'll close shop like whenever they want to. It's like, well, you going to be back today? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very different way to live life. But it's some people agree with that, and some people don't agree with that. And I'm like, well, that's just different. And I'm like, hey, let me try to, if I like it, let me try to incorporate that a little bit. And then if you go to like, let's say Japan, very regimented, right? It's everything is like by the book. There's no gray area in terms of what you can do and can't do. And if there's an appeal to an authority figure here in the US is like, oh, Fauci says put on a mask, I'm gonna take it off. Or if he says don't wear a mask, I'm gonna put one on. It's like opposite authority there. It's like, hey, this is the rule. We say whatever we say goes. It's like, okay, then we're gonna do that. And Netherlands, this was talked about in a podcast recently, the Andrew Schultz podcast, and I thought that was a really interesting observation. That I also noticed that it's like the Netherlands is a very open and free culture. You could pretty much do whatever you want there. You're saying like you can smoke weed, there's prostitution everywhere. It's like very easy to do all of those things, but there's also a respect for authority in terms of like, hey, when we tell you not to do something, you just don't do it, because it's like you can pretty much do anything. So we
except against authority, then
it's like if we
going into popo,
we say to do you can't do this, like just don't do it.
Yeah,
kind of thing. So I 100% love the idea of like, I think there should be some program where people go abroad. And I thought about this myself as like a profession. It's like, hey, what if I could cultivate some kind of like program where you take teenagers or whatever to other countries and you organize these trips throughout, like it should be mandatory. Everybody from wherever, it's part of your high school curriculum. You got to go to another country for not even, a year, but like just say a week and see what the hell is going on over there.
I think that would be tremendous. Looking back on the like high school and even middle school, what are some changes you think we need to make in the education system? Do you think we need to maybe look at how other cultures treat education? I mean, there's a vast difference in how teachers are respected in our country versus a lot of others, and there's also seems to be a much more vocational focus in some countries. What are some thoughts do you have that you might have with that?
That is interesting. So like, I'm not an education expert. I have done some research in terms of the institutional problems that you probably are aware of with education. I think we just have to, I think in the US, we have to decide on whether or not education at all in terms of the K through 12 is a part of the country's foundation. It's like, do we want, like a lot of countries like in Asia, there's no K through 12. Like, there's no public education necessarily. There's a lot of privatized education, and it costs money. And only certain people have access to schools and things like that. And so we have to decide, hey, do we want this or not? That's my biggest thing is like, I see a lot of movement towards privatization, whether it be like making teachers gig workers or defunding and doing this school choice thing where you're like, oh, you can technically take your money and put it wherever you want. But in the end, it's like, okay, it seems like that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal seems to be the demolishing of public education as a whole and making that disappear. So I think we have to really, I think that the question isn't more so like the curriculum and this and that. I think there's a lot of, hoopla made about like all that stuff. But I think the important part is like, do we want this institution to exist or not? Because I grew up in the public education system, so I value it, and I think it's changed a lot since I've gone to school. Like the teachers are like, from what I see, they're like so young because they get so burned out now very quickly.
Yeah.
Like when I went to school, like teachers were like 50, 60-year-olds, and now they're like 22 through 25 because they can only take it. I've talked to a few teachers. They're like, we can't, it's not a sustainable job for the most part. So I think we have to, if we care about it, we have to listen to the teachers. I think that's the number one feedback that I've gotten when I've done my research and talking to teachers is like, nobody listens to our ideas. Like we know like how to best how to educate, and we're completely disregarded. And that's,
I think that's true. And that's, I could go off on that because there's a lot of times the way its system is set up is it's very top down, like both from the federal and the state level and even the districts. You have these people that are so far removed from the classroom creating curriculum, making these decisions where the actual teachers on the front line are. And what happens is the veteran teachers, they know this is not correct, or they know how to teach. And you end up getting these, you get these like specialists that come from the downtown office. They come in to tell you how to teach grammar, and yet you actually taught them grammar when they were a student, they were your student. And so now they're coming to tell you how to teach, and you're kind of like, okay, come on now. But you're right. I think I think that might go with a lot of professions. The police, I know a lot of people talk about, one of the solutions to a lot of the police problems is training, and not just, hey, you went to police academy, congratulations, now go be a police officer the rest of your life. It's having that follow-up and having a lot of focus on the mental health of police. A buddy of mine, Dr. Ray Roberts, he makes a great parallel. This is a great guy because he grew up on the streets of Baltimore. I mean, he basically grew up in The Wire.
In The Wire, huh?
I mean, he was like, The Wire is a documentary to him. I mean, he probably knew someone that Omar was based off of. Goes to VMI with me. We both graduate VMI. He goes off military. Then he becomes he's now currently a doctor of education. He's in Saudi Arabia. He teaches English teachers to teach English to the Saudi Arabian students and civilians. And he and I talk a lot about a lot of different comparisons. And it's funny because he's one of those people, like you were talking about earlier about uncancelable. He's self-sustained, and he's not afraid to speak truth. And a lot of time they'll say, well, hey, who you're a privileged person. And he's like, privileged? Let me tell you, when I was 14 years old, I was on the streets. He would talk about his growing up and it was definitely not privileged. But one of the things he brought up about with the police, and I'm curious to know your thoughts, is he feels like one of the problems is we've got too many Barney Fifes and not enough Andy Taylors, to kind of use the parallel to the Andy Griffith Show, where we're not, the police officers are not being incorporated enough into dealing with how to handle situations. They're not getting that training. But on the flip side is, like, there needs to be much more of a community outreach with the police as well. I mean, for every one video you see the police playing basketball with a little kid in the neighborhood, there's 10 videos of some kind of police brutality. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So what are some of your thoughts on that? Or do you?
Yeah, I can give you some of my more or less uninformed thoughts of the police, because I haven't studied that extensively. But I think just based on observation, I think it's too easy to become a police officer. I don't think the training is like, I was looking into it. I was like, it's way more difficult to become a park ranger. You have to go to school. You have to study like forestry for like 4 years and like do some kind of like internship in the park service. And then it takes like 8 years to become like a park ranger. And I think
is that when you hat? Is that when they give you the hat after the 8 years?
This hat is from the San Diego Padres. I'm
sorry.
No, but this hat is a sports team hat, but
go Padres.
Well, it's a tough franchise to support because they haven't won very much. Yeah. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But in terms of, I think we also ask the police to do way too much. They're doing a lot of stuff that they're just not prepared to do. And I also, this is probably slightly controversial. I don't think on an individual level the police are paid enough. I think if you look at aggregate police pay, like they're like, oh, it's such a big budget, blah blah blah. But I don't think like the right people are being incentivized to enter the police force because it's such a difficult job, and everybody just kind of want to, everybody wants to work at like Google, or like they want to go into Wall Street, and they're in because that's where all the money is. It's like, no, those are our jobs are so much easier than being a police officer who's like constantly putting in a dangerous position all the time. So it's like, I do have a little bit of sympathy there, but I do agree with you that, for every one good video that you see, there's 10 bad ones. So I think it's much more of like, hey, we got to think about, once again, like the role of police in society and how much do we value? Similar as teachers, right? Teachers, I think, are very important. They pay nothing. So how do we like correct for when the market is mispricing the jobs, right? It's like, oh, mothers are paid zero. Well, they provide a lot of value to society, but the market value for a mother is zero because they don't make any money. And so similar, the market, I think, is incorrectly valuing these jobs. And then it's like, do we want to do anything to fix that? Or do we just want to let this, play out and let the market decide, which is a lot of people's ideas. Like, oh, the market can decide everything, except I don't think that's, in terms of my studying of business and the outcomes of those decisions, I do not believe that to be true.
Well, I think. All right, we're going to take a quick break from solving all of the world's problems to tell you about a good friend of mine and a service she's offering. Are you tired of feeling like your dream financial future is out of reach? Are you struggling with overwhelming debt, trying to pay off your home early, or simply wanting to give more? Well, my good friend Vanessa Rutter Jackson is here to help. An educator and military veteran, Vanessa is here to guide you through the confusion and make your dream financial future a reality. With her certified financial coaching services, she'll help you create a personalized plan that sets you up to win with money. As an educator and a mother of two, Vanessa understands the challenges of scraping by and stretching paychecks. She's been there, and she knows how to navigate the financial landscape to help you thrive. Don't let financial stress hold you back any longer. Take the first step towards financial freedom today with Rutter Jackson Financial Coaching. Reach out to Vanessa today for a free 45-minute consultation at varutter34@gmail.com or go to tinyurl.com/RJMoneyCoach. That's varutter34@gmail.com or tinyurl.com/RJMoneyCoach. Remember, it's never too late to take control of your finances and achieve your dreams. Start your journey to financial freedom with Rutter Jackson Financial Coaching today. All right, now let's get back to solving the world's problems with the most charming host on the interwebs. Well, I think you're right. Specifically with the teaching profession, was it in the 1950s? It was pretty much all women, and it was in a different society. Was a little different, and it was probably easier to pay teachers less. And versus now, it's like it's a much more. They want you to get a master's degree, let alone bachelor's. And again, we could spend another hour talking about the whole college tuition versus pay. I got a master's degree, and we spent all this money on that, and yet my yearly salary was nowhere near going to be able to reasonably pay this student loan off. And that's at that level. It's like, you get somebody that's 18 years old signing up for some, I'm going to go to college and figure this out. And then they get out into the workforce and they're like, wait a minute, why am I eating ramen every day when just to pay my student loans off? If they pay their student loans, then that gets to a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But do you think also, in addition to this high, like paying teachers, paying police officers more, paying these high stakes almost like high impact jobs, because like a police officer versus the manager at Arby's. I'm not dissing the manager at Arby's, because that get me a beef and cheddar, you made my day. But like that person's not going to have such a dire impact on someone's life, unlike a police officer. Hopefully we're at a time where most Arby's managers aren't afraid of being shot every day. Hopefully we're at a point where, there's not some worry that the manager's going to beat somebody up for the wrong reason or something like that. But like, is there also with that should we hold a higher standard for those positions to go with that pay? Because like, if we're kind of like you were saying earlier, anybody can be a police officer. Well, if anybody it can be a police officer, what are we doing to weed out those those guys and gals that probably shouldn't be police officers? Do you follow me?
I do. I think it comes the responsibility is very important it comes with a job. Basically, it's like, hey, that this job requires you to be in the line of fire, and you need to be able to know how to handle those situations. And it's obviously up to the institution itself to provide you with that proper training to put you in the best position possible. But on an individual level, if you know that you're in that job, you also have to know that that's a responsibility. Same with like, being a pilot, right? That is a very dangerous job. And you need to have the responsibility to say, hey, my cabin crew, my passengers are the number one priority. And I need to do everything I can to keep them safe. That means, taking care of myself and being in the right mind, getting the right rest before I go and operate this, heavy machinery, similar to I think police is that I think the burden falls on them to be, to do their job the best, because you're choosing that profession. Now, the other side, so I think there's a balance between, okay, so if we demand that much from them, they should also get compensated, in a fair way.
Yeah, that way, you're more apt to get a Sully Sullenberger flying your plane than a Launchpad McQuack. You're much more more like, you get, if you get on and your pilot's 3 sheets to the wind from the airport bar. Even though most of the flying is just the takeoff and landing, they just press a cruise control and they're just chilling. But when stuff goes down, you want Sully Sullenberger in the pilot seat. It definitely is something. Definitely something that you want. But you're right. In order to attract more Sullys, we gotta pay them more. I want to talk a little bit about yourself, James. How, growing up and kind of your story, how have you been able to balance because just my perspective of watching your videos and just talking with you now, you come across as a very analytical, logical thinker, and like you seem to have a sense of fairness, and where it's not as likely among other people to be clouded by emotion. Not saying you're emotionless, I'm not saying that at all, but like where you seem to look at problems much more analytically than a lot of folks. Growing up, how has that played into your life, and have you had to overcome any mental health like challenges like depression or the feeling of not fitting in, or have you ever felt like you're right and everybody thinks you're wrong and you want to just scream, I'm right, but nobody wants to listen to you?
I'm glad I come across the way that you're describing me, which is a compliment. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my own personality is much more complex than that. I think I have like a little bit of, this is once again, that 51-49 that comes back into play, is that, yes, I have that 51% logic, I think, but a lot of me is emotion. I react very emotionally in a lot of situations, especially if I'm in that situation myself and not looking at and analyzing geopolitical or societal issues where I can be a little bit more logical naturally. It's like, if I'm in that moment, I'm way more emotional. So, so growing up, I think there's been a couple of things that like have impacted me in terms of like, I have this, I don't know what you call it, like an abandonment type issue where I feel like I need to be liked by everybody and this and that. That's, I think, played an important or a critical role in my life in the decision making. And it's only until more recently, so the last, I think it was about a year or two ago, I started seeing a therapist. Very, very powerful in terms of just aligning and just having a person to kind of align your thought process. Like, hey, I'm thinking about this in this way. Is this a healthy thought, or is this like, where is this coming from? So I see like a therapist every other week, and that's really helped me in the journey of like regulating my emotions and having that try to project in a more positive way. Because I think it's very important to be emotional. Because if without emotion, we're just robots and machines. So, but it's about harnessing that emotion in a positive way. And that's kind of been my challenge that I'm constantly working on is having that side not override some of the logical things that I know, like in terms of like arguments or things that it's like, I know that this is the right thing to do. Like I can 100% see it, but in that moment, I just can't bring myself to do it. And I react emotionally. So I think that's where my own personal mental health journey is at this juncture.
Oh, I'm right there with you. Both on the that abandonment thing, the one the likes, and also just that, I find myself both a little bit of a cynic, but also an idealist. So I'm probably 51 idealist, 49 cynic. I know maybe that's probably what it is, but yeah, like one of the things that's really I really like about our education system, and again, I don't want people to think I'm bashing it, but one of the things they are starting to push out there is teaching self-regulation of emotions to students. And a friend of mine, Emily, she has this whole lesson that she's shared with a lot of teachers about using the movie Inside Out to help like pre-K through 5, students understand the emotions and how to regulate it. Kind of like you said, harness. I love that word because you controlling your emotions isn't stamping out the emotion. The emotion is how you're feeling. If you're angry, you're angry. It's not wrong to be angry. Where the judgment comes is how you handle that emotion, how you regulate it. And I always try to tell my students, it's like if you're cold, if you're shivering, it's not shame on you for feeling cold. It's you are cold. Put on a jacket. Or find a way to get warm. Same thing with emotions. If you are sad, don't be like, well, why am I sad? I have nothing to be sad about. What's wrong with me? Just be like, I'm sad. I need to find a way to get out of this sadness and get back to kind of a happy, joy spot. I think that's important for a lot of us to try to grasp. Your therapy isn't through
BetterHelp.
Uber.
No, and it was and this is a personal thing, but it was a very challenging process. It probably took me like, I don't know, from the start of one of those, like, hey, I think I want to see a therapist, to the time I saw a therapist was probably like years. It was like, because it was like, first I had to like, okay, I got to find a therapist. It's impossible to do. So I just kept putting it off. And it's like, once you start the search, it's like, okay, these websites are just, I'm trying to find somebody in the area. And it's like, I don't know anything about this person. And that is like a big mental hurdle when you're like, I know I'm going to go into this and I have to divulge a bunch of personal stuff to a stranger. And that's a little bit of a paralyzing thought as well.
Yeah.
And then the third challenge comes in. It's like, okay, I found somebody. Is like, okay, the insurance policy work and like, am I going to be covered? How much is the coverage? And so like, there's a lot of obstacles in terms of actually getting to the point of finding a therapist and seeking that mental health that help that you need. So that was a big challenge.
It's kind of, I like in therapists, like, and again, if you want to go through betterhelp.com, go for it. They're not an official sponsor, but there's something about when you kind of like find a physician or finding a trusted mechanic. You may go to different shops before you find that trusted mechanic that you trust with your car, and that they're going to say, hey, this is what you need. Hey, the alignment, blah blah blah, and you feel good about it. And you may have to go to different therapists. I went through a therapist. My employer at the time had these like 5 free visits a therapist, and I was really just kind of in a dark place mentally. I was, lots of stuff going on, but I remember going to see his office was in this building, and on the bottom floor they were holding a drug addicts anonymous kind of meeting, because all these people were like, they were really just shaken up, and I felt sorry for him. I get up into his office, and in the waiting room there's people really having a bad time. This girl is just completely sobbing. This other guy was just like pacing and all upset, and there's and all these things going on, and I'm just like feeling like, well, here I am with my stupid problems. Yeah. And I remember sitting there with this guy through these challenges, and I'm venting to the guy and telling him my problems, and I almost feel like I'm putting him to sleep, because he's about to deal with some real drama with the guy that's coming in after me, and I'm sitting there talking about how my dad didn't approve of me in football when I quit football, that kind of thing. It's like that's like nothing compared to this avalanche of drama coming. But like, I do think it's what I lost about that at the time was the importance of me sharing it. I think a lot of times that's where a lot of the help is you have somebody that's an expert, and they're going to give you advice, but sometimes just the act of speaking it out there is helpful. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Because then, once you are able to share, there's a bit of a burden that's kind of lifted, and say, okay, I acknowledge this situation, versus like, suppressing it when you're like, no, this is wrong, or I'm not supposed to be feeling this way. I think that's unhealthy in some respects. I think there's a bit of a balance, because I challenge my therapist always in this way. I'm like, I know that you guys are trained to say like, hey, your feelings are like valid and this and that. But I'm like, hey, if my feelings are not valid, I need you to tell me that this is bullshit that I'm saying right now.
Yeah.
And like, I'm being ridiculous. And so like, I also push back, and it's like my nature. It's like, I'm pushing back on the person that is the quote unquote expert, and saying, hey, I think there's some negative practices that are happening in mental health that I see that it's like, oh, your feelings are the most important thing. Well, sometimes it is, but also, you have to be able to balance that with how these feelings are manifesting. It's not just like, oh, your feelings are valid. That's not the end of the conversation. It's like, well, it's valid, but then like, how are you going to project that to the world? That's also really important.
I think that's huge. And, a couple episodes earlier, we were talking about the difference between kindness and niceness, where if somebody has a booger in their nose, someone being nice ignores the booger and just is polite and talks to them, where someone that's kind pulls them aside and says, hey, James, you got, go like this, that kind of thing. And I think that happens a lot of times when you find that trusted person, and that not just goes for therapy. I think it goes for our circle of friends and our support network. If you have people that aren't afraid to tell you, hey, that's bullshit, or not necessarily call you out all the time, but like call you out when things are bullshit, but do it in a friend way. To me, that's so much more helpful, because that goes into that whole communication thing too, because then you're not in an echo chamber. You're getting that instant feedback, like, okay, I've gone too far. I think a lot of celebrities, they lose that because they get surrounded by all these yes people. On the flip side is you get a lot of people in a toxic environment where they're constantly being told you're not good enough, and that pulls people down and keeps them from really trying to pursue what they want. How important is it to find people that are there for you and genuinely there for you, versus just nice people, or people that are not going to tell you what you need to hear?
Extremely important. I think the surrounding yourself with, I think it's maybe easier for a normal person than a celebrity, because I think that with that fame comes like a lot of other people trying to get in their circle for nefarious reasons. But I think, when I look for my friends, I always, the ones that I'm close to, is like, hey, how do you interact with me? But I also see how they interact with other people. Not that I'm like the best judge, but I remember this one instance of a person that I like, because I can pretty much be friends with anybody in terms of like their ideas, and I don't really care, they're in terms of, if they have ideas that offend me and this kind of stuff, that doesn't bother me. What does bother, the one thing that does bother me is in terms of values of how you treat other people who are your friends. And I remember this one person that wasn't really close to them, but I just noticed it's like, hey, they had a really good friend of theirs over and they're visiting. And they went to take a shower, and then she just kept, talking shit about this friend that's supposedly such a close friend. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound like this person's coming to visit you, and you have harboring all of these negative emotions towards them that you're not even telling. They have no idea that you're feeling this way, and you're just, in a sense, like, I don't think that was being a loyal friend. It's like, if I was a loyal friend, it's like, hey, if I have all these problems with somebody, I'm going to go and pull them aside and be like, hey, this stuff that you're saying, like, bothers me. And I have a very close friend that we do this with. It's like, we had let's like 16-hour drive together earlier this year. And we just talked the whole time. And there was moments when we offended each other and we're like, okay, let's talk about this. Like, I've just offended you in some way. Let me dissect that emotion. Like, tell me why you're feeling offended by this. And then we kind of worked it out.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I think that's really important to find people who are willing to take that time and unconditionally going to be there to not just support you, but also to provide the feedback that is a really important part of developing a trusting relationship.
Yeah, that's so much more helpful. It's that, and you, like your situation with your friend. As soon as they go to take a shower and your friend is bad mouthing them, what are they saying about you when you leave?
Right.
It's like that, and there's a lot of that in a lot of workplaces. I've had several moments where there's that one employee that they're like, let me tell you some tea, let me give you the tea on so and so, but then when you find out they're also talking smack about you, and it's like, but even then it's like that's a good judge is how people do treat others to that respect, and how important it is to have those genuine connections. You brought up hashing things out even when you things might be offensive or talking. Are you familiar with Daryl Davis? He's Daryl Davis. I really encourage you to look him up. He was a musician who would tour with like James Brown and other musicians. And in like the 60s and 70s, he would, and 80s, a lot of times to drive to a gig, he'd have to drive 8, 9, 10, 12 hours. And sometimes he would ride with other band members. And sometimes the other band members could be from anywhere. And he rode with this one white guy who turned out to be a member of the KKK. And Daryl Davis is a black man. And what was interesting about this is that he, instead of it being like, as they're driving, of course, the guy starts talking about how, we're in the superior rights and, all that kind of stuff. And instead of getting into an argument, Daryl's asking questions and started having this conversation. And they're stuck in a car. What are they going to do? And he starts talking to him. And by the entire trip, by the time they got back from the whole gig and everything, the guy that he was with quit the KKK, turned in his robe and hood to Daryl Davis. And as of right now, he's collected over 200 hoods and KKK. He's gotten over 200 people to quit the KKK. Wow. And to me, what's significant about that is it was done through communication, not just talking, but listening and talking. And it's kind of that thing where you either learn or you steel man your argument. Like if you have a take on something and you have to explain it, you're either going to be stronger in your opinion if it's as you explain it better, or people might share a different perspective that now you're starting to question what you believe. I highly encourage anybody to check out Daryl Davis. It's a great story of somebody that, I mean, you can't get very far from a black man and a KKK wizard getting along to be so polar opposites of the spectrum, but finding common ground. So that, to me, that's a tremendous story. And how do we reach that? How do we start communicating and listening instead of trying to dunk on each other all the time?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer for that on a societal level, but I think it's for me, we have to incentivize that in some way to say, hey, we're in a greater goal. How do you create a cohesive society, right? There has to be something overarching that's greater than the tribe. And this is one of those things that there was a commencement speak. Well, it's actually not it's Justin Trudeau was the commencement speaker when I graduated from New York University.
All
And
right.
yeah, and he gave this speech that I was so moved by, and then he did all this stuff after that during COVID that I just antithesis what he said there.
Yeah,
But
right.
but he
Good
was
speaker
talking.
though.
But that speech was actually had a profound impact on me and how I interact with people, because he was saying, hey, we're always in these tribes. It's like, this is my people, this is my team, my tribe, not yours. It's like, I'm in this group of people, I'm in this, we had blocks, and so it was like, we are in this block, or we're part of this school, this is my alma mater, we're against you. And he's saying we need to take the time to actually spend time and learn about people who don't think the same as you. It's very easy to have a group of friends that say the same, think in the same way. It's very comfortable. But how, we improve and make society better is by spending time with people that you wouldn't necessarily be naturally spending time with if you had the choice to do that. So I was very moved by that, and that's why I try to seek other people's ideas. I'm like, okay, tell me, like, if I don't agree with this, like, all right, tell me why you believe so strongly in this, and I try to figure out why they hold the position they hold, versus like just trying to impart my position onto them. And obviously, then I made this video like many moons ago about, okay, so his entire handling of COVID was the antithesis of this, like this thing of like trying to figure out, okay, why is the anti-vaxxer feeling the way that they're feeling? Like, why would they feel the need to, let's say, put their health in jeopardy? Like, why are they so against this? And to learn about that position. But anyway, so that's kind of how I see, is like, if we have that desire to learn about another person's position is probably how we create, and to get people to do this, I don't know exactly how, but it certainly has been positive in my personal experience.
It may be an impossible task, but worth the effort, kind of thing. Where
Yeah.
we might be. Is it Sisyphus? Who's the guy that rolls the ball up the hill every time and then it rolls
I
back?
don't know.
Probably Sisyphus. Some dude, it's Sissy Pants or something like that. And Trudeau's a great example, because he treated those truckers very fairly. No sarcasm there, but like, okay, like in a case, and now some extreme cases might be someone like Bill Cosby, or for pro wrestling fans out there, I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Benoit. These are people that had a history of being beloved, but then one or two terrible, or in some cases multiple terrible things. Like Chris Benoit was a wrestler that was beloved, and then due to his severe long-term concussions, he went crazy and killed his wife and son, and then killed himself. And it's an unspeakable, terrible, horrible thing, the way it happened. And it really has tainted his legacy. But kind of going with that baby in the bathwater, and that's an extreme version of what you're saying with Trudeau. Even though Trudeau's done these things, but it doesn't take away from the words that were meaningful to you at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like with Bill Cosby, it's like his crimes or what he did shouldn't take away from his influence on blacks on media, in the media, or the Cosby, the wholesome entertainment value that he projected. Like Chris Benoit is a wrestler that I really liked, but I can separate who he was back then versus this monster that his concussions created. Is it important for us to, is there anybody that can't be forgiven, or is there a, where's the line between forgiveness or not? And then I don't want to talk about cancel culture, but like, should we try to be objective and look at the whole person versus just focusing on one terrible deed that they did? Like, am I allowed to listen to Michael Jackson music? Because Thriller was awesome.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think ultimately it's like, what's your goal when it comes to the cancellation? Like, why can't we enjoy the music of Michael Jackson? Is it to set an example, to say, hey, if you ever do something bad, this is what could happen? Is it to deter people's behavior, or is it to show that I'm a superior person that's more woke than another person, to say, hey, I am so in tune with or I'm so much of a more spiritual person that I can't even tolerate this, and you're sinful because you listen. So there's a lot of like, I think, different things that weigh into this, but like my personal thing is that you should be able to like enjoy entertainment for the entertainment's sake because you like it, especially if it's in that sense, or whether maybe in my case it was a speech that a person made that then ended up doing some other stuff, but it's like, hey, those words were meaningful to me, so that's why I am okay with, it's still meaningful to me no matter what he did later on. You can say like, hey, I don't support those actions by that person, but this particular speech or this song was meaningful to me that has nothing to even do with that. So I think I don't know if it's important to make this distinction, but I think there's an argument to be made that there's no harm in people feeling this way, to say like, oh, I still like R. Kelly, the Ignition. This is actually happened at a wedding this year that they played the song Ignition, and people were like, it's a banger. So people were dancing on, and I pulled my phone out. I was like, this is going to be hilarious because I'm, that person. I'm like, all right, I'm going to film everybody here. And then all of a sudden they see the camera. They're like, no, we can't have this. Yeah, don't cancel. And it is done in a joking way. But that's like kind of the exact effect of like, you should be able to dance to Ignition because it's a good song.
I mean, hey, bump and grind, dude. I mean, that's baby making music, right?
Yeah. And they'll do that without saying, hey, I'm also endorsing his pedophilia or whatever situation that he was engaged in. It's like there should be a distinction between those two, and I think it's healthy to have that distinction, to not be such a Puritan in a sense, because I think I don't know what, because if you were to make an argument, what good could come out of that type of scenario?
Yeah, if everybody is canceled for one thing that they did, it's like everybody's canceled,
right? Yeah. So I fail to see the positive. Like, if you can make a case to me that say, hey, this is why we need to cancel these people and never interact with anything that they ever had to do with, I'm open to hearing that, and I'm curious to see what people would say.
Well, it's like it's funny because I have relatives that will like refuse to watch certain movies if they have an actor in it. I love Tom Cruise movies. The Mission Impossible series, one of my favorites. Jack Reacher's got all these great movies out. Top Gun Maverick was awesome, but I'm not signing up for Scientology. I'm not going. I'm not waiting in line to get my Thetans and Xeno and all that stuff. And I think that's an important distinction too. It is a good thing though, James, that we've got the Hollywood is there to help us with all these political issues, to really. All they have to do is sing Imagine and there's peace. I mean, I think that's very helpful. I'm glad that they're there for that. And but like, why do we look to like, actors and celebrities and expect them to be these philosophers when I don't know if we're setting ourselves up for disappointment with that.
I mean, I think that's changing. I think at one point maybe there was one point there was less of a gap between maybe like the perception of a Hollywood star versus a regular person. It's like, hey, they're also regular people. And then the more now we realize it's like, well, they're not really all that regular. Like their lives are completely separate. They don't really interact with the world the same way. So therefore, like, what do they have to say? I mean, like, what's the value in their idea? It's not like that. I'm not saying none of Hollywood stars have. There's quite a number of them, I think, that have good politics or are out there saying things that are very helpful, but I don't know if they would be the gold standard of like, oh, this is what we need to look for. And I don't think anybody really feels that way anymore. I'm not sure if that many people are like, oh,
probably 5149.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I would like to get to know somebody who was like really moved by the Imagine performance and say like that.
I think people were moved. I think people were moved, but not in the way they were hoping it was going to be.
Because I have yet to find one that was like, oh wow, that really touched me in this way, and it totally changed.
Oh, I'm gonna go hug my neighbor now because Gal Gadot sung Imagine. Now I feel better. Let's bring each other together. Well, hey, James, I have one kind of last question for you because I really appreciate your time. Wow, we're almost at the 2-hour mark, dude. We could sit here and have beers and chat all night long, dude. But I want you to kind of, and maybe this is like vicarious or whatever, but I was really excited when you became a regular contributor to Breaking Points, because Breaking Points has been one of my favorite shows, and as far as like independent media. Again, I may not always agree with like Crystal or Sagar. I'm sorry, Sagar, I'm not wearing a tie. Sorry about that. But like, how did that feel when you got recognized by Breaking Points and they kind of made the call to bring you on? I mean, was there some validation in the hard work you've been putting in, and what would you say to people that are also trying, not necessarily trying to get on Breaking Points, but like that are creating content like this, and then like suddenly you're getting to this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, it felt good, obviously, but I think ultimately for me, like creating all this content, I mean, as a content creator yourself, you probably understand is that I feel the need to say this stuff because I would rather not do this. To be completely honest with you, like I came from a very cushy corporate consulting job, the management consult. I was like, this is like pretty easy for me, quite honestly. Maybe because I'm a smart dude. I like to think of myself as a smart dude. I'm like, this is not too challenging. Like maximizing shareholder value is not that complicated to do.
Yeah.
I just couldn't continue to do it. And it just felt so horrible. I was like, I wish I didn't feel horrible about it. And then I could just, make whatever it was. It was like almost when I left, it was like a $250,000 a year. I was like, this is not too bad. But I just feel the need to, like, I think it's important to say all these things. And then when you get recognized, so basically the story there is that like Sagar just DM'd me on Twitter and he's like, hey, we're looking to bring on other people to contribute to Breaking Points and making other styles of videos other than just breaking news. We've seen your videos. We really like what you do. So let us know if you're interested. And so obviously I was very, very happy to have that opportunity. And I think it just comes with just, if you believe in something, just keep doing it. And it really doesn't matter if you're recognized, but at some point, if you really are there and you keep improving your craft, because that was me too. I was when I was first approached, I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this kind of thing. And quite honest, every time I look back at my videos from like a year ago, I'm like, this is a horrible video. Like I was not very
polished.
I was not very polished. I couldn't articulate that well, and I was kind of boring, and the graphics aren't very good. And similarly, I'll probably watch this podcast back and be like, well, that was not that well spoken either.
This one's fine.
Yeah.
Just please don't go and watch my episodes 1 through 5 of Mental Health Mondays. Please just ignore those.
Yeah. And we're all, so it's a little bit of the self-doubt came up too, in terms of like, hey, am I ready for doing something like this? And I was, no. So in every video, I tried to improve an aspect of something, whether it be like the delivery or the background or the graphics. And I think that's a really important part of like being, a creator in this sense of like, you just need, it's more like you got to want to improve yourself. And then when you get that external recognition, that's just almost like a bonus that isn't like, if you're just trying to get on, cable or like the biggest news show, like there's a difference in your approach. I think there's some people in this space that have this goal in mind that I want to get on, CNN, or I want to be a writer for the New York Times.
Yeah.
And that's a different approach than myself personally. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's a different approach. And me, I never cared about that. I just care about saying whatever I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So that was most important. If I get recognized for that, then that's good. And I get those opportunities. But I think ultimately it was good to hear that, hey, my work is paying off.
Yeah, that's tremendous. But you hit the nail on the head too. And I think a lot of times, and I mean, we could do another 2 hours on the topic of people expecting instant gratification versus, putting in the hard work. But a lot of times the work itself isn't so much work if you are passionate about what you're doing. It's kind of like you never work a day in your life if you love what you do. It doesn't mean that, I don't get frustrated when I'm trying to edit a video. But when I was a car sales manager for a enterprising rental company, which you can read into that one. But that was a similar situation. I was making killer money, but my soul was being chewed away, and like it got to a point where there was moments where I was asked to compromise my integrity and I wouldn't. And long story short, I started really deciding I got to get out of this. I got to get into a career where I'm much more fulfilled. And that's where education came in. But when I was there, one of my coworkers, shout out to Leah Chu, she's awesome. She brought up this whole, she brought up this philosophy. She said something about you need to always be a student of the business you're in. Be a student of the business. And if your business is car sales, you've got to, there's no final, okay, I'm a salesperson now. You've got to constantly be looking for ways to improve. And I think that's the same with anything. I think it's the same with podcasting. Like I'm constantly looking at my thumbnails. I'm constantly looking at, okay, why didn't people click on this one versus that one? Why did this one go viral, but nobody liked this one? And I feel that's important to be a student of your business. And do you feel like do you feel like it's important to constantly, like is the focus, you want success, but is sometimes the issue people may have is what their definition of success is?
Yeah, I think you have to know what you want, right? Are you going into this with fame in mind, or are you in this with the idea of spreading knowledge, education component to this? So it really depends. I mean, I've seen a lot of people, especially in the political space, independent space, switch up their content and their perspective a lot from their beginning to where they are now because it worked in terms of drawing in viewers. So I think it depends on the person's desire. And then you take a different approach. But I do think that you need to, I mean, the learning part is universal, is that they need to learn how to improve. Now, the way you improve is dependent on your ultimate goal of wanting to be really famous or wanting to spread knowledge and ideas, or some other goal of being creative or provocative, or whatever the person's primary motivation is will determine what they are actually learning.
I just want to become famous enough to be in the next Imagine video. I want Gal to call me up.
That's huge.
Imagine there's well, James, this has been awesome, brother. This is fantastic. I'd love to have you back on again down the road, man. This has been a great chat. Any final words of advice for everybody out there in this crazy, who knows if Armageddon's around the corner or not, world we're in right now? Is there any advice you have for everybody?
I don't know. I don't think I'm really qualified to give any particular advice. Although the one thing I can do is, or that I want to say is like, I always want that person to be kind to whoever they're interacting with in that particular moment. That's something that I try to do and I struggle with sometimes, is like you have all your own stuff going on, and it's like, who are you really, like, for example, this is from my work. It's like a lot of times we pass on our aggression to like our subordinates. Like we're getting pressure from our boss, and then we push that downwards, and they have nothing to do with it in terms of like, hey, who is that serving? Oh, you're being mean to serve people above you that don't really care about you. It's like there's, figuring out who are the people that you want to support and try to align your behavior that way, versus like grinding it out all day for somebody who doesn't really care about whether you grind it out for them or not. Is I guess the final thought that I would give. Not everybody would necessarily agree with that, but that's thing I think it's important to me in making this world a bit more pleasant to live in, is like, try to be nice to the person and try to understand their lives before you pass whatever you need on down to them.
Very well said. Pay the kindness forward. Don't transmit the anger and hate, or the apathy, if you will. I have to remind myself of that with students. I got the big boss coming down on me. Why didn't you turn in this lesson plan? And then meanwhile, I'm like, okay, let's talk. Let's teach history with Minecraft or something. Let's do something fun. But James, thank you so much. 5149. You can, if you're not subscribed already, what's wrong with you? Subscribe. All the details will be at the bumper at the end here. James, thank you so much. Keep being you. Keep doing what you're doing. Go Padres, maybe next year. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, we're Cubs fans in this house, and yeah, I mean, we're now 7 years away from that glorious moment. So
yes, brutal finish to the season there for the Cubs.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on from that. So, well, for James Lee, this has been 4951. Yeah, this has been Mental Health Mondays. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. I'm trying to do the 5149 exit. I did it. Always remember, you are not alone. Catch full episodes every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific.